Hi guys, I hope you guys are doing well. So for this video, we are going to do chapter 20, which is all about inflation. Okay, can I read this? Okay, so the learning outcomes, once you have studied this chapter, you should be able to define what inflation is, distinguish between the various measures of inflation, which is consumer price index, producer price index, and GDP deflator. Should be able to discuss the main causes of inflation, which is demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Should be able to explain why inflation is a problem, meaning now the effect of inflation, and also suggest policies to fight or curb inflation. Right. Okay, so what is inflation? When the general price level rises. Okay, we've looked at the slide before. Okay, inflation, guys, it's a significant or continuous increase in the general price level, right? With the quantity of goods and services remaining the same. So inflation is basically, in simple terms, it's just an increase in the price of goods and services, right? But these terms are also important. So you need to, in your definition, you need to have significant, meaning that inflation is a significant, right? A significant increase in the price of goods and services. So it shouldn't be just like the prices increased by maybe 1%, but the increase should be significant and also continuous. So the prices have to be increasing continuously. It does not have to be a once-off increase, but a continuous increase in the prices in general. And also in the general price level means that in the prices of various goods and services. So it does not have to be just an increase in the price of bread or an increase in the price of just one good. It has to be an increase in the general prices, so in the various goods and services, in the price of various goods and services, right? So inflation is significant, meaning that has to increase by a significant amount or percentage, continuous, not just a once-off increase, but a continuous increase in the general price level. So in the prices of various goods and services, then we can say we have what we call inflation, right? If there's a significant increase and it's a continuous increase, and it's not just an increase in one good, but it's an increase in different in various type of goods, then we have what we call inflation, right? Deflation is the opposite of inflation. So obviously, if inflation is an increase in the general price level, then deflation will definitely be what? A decrease, right? It's just deflation is the opposite of inflation, right? I think it's going to be easy to remember this one, these two, because you know inflation. So now when it's D, then it means now it's the opposite of this one. So deflation is a negative inflation, meaning that the price level is falling, right? The target range is 3 to 6% in South Africa. So in South Africa, we always try to keep the inflation between the inflation targeting of 3 to 6%, right? The inflation rate between the inflation targeting of 3 to 6%. Different elements of the definition. So we said ukuthi inflation is a significant, so we need to have significant, meaning that the increase in price must be significant, right? As I already mentioned, a 1% increase per year might not be regarded as inflation. It could be, for example, be ascribed to increase quality of a good or service. So meaning that it might mean that maybe the quality of that particular good increased. So obviously the price of that good had to increase, but we do not consider it inflation because the percentage is just 1%. It has to be a significant percentage, right? An increase must be significant. And continuous also, it does not have to be a once-off increase in the prices. It has to be a continuous increase in the prices. Price level, which basically is the same with the general price level. It means there has to be an increase in the various goods and services, right? Not just an increase in one good. And I made an example with bread. if the price of bread keeps on increasing, even if it's continuous, if it's not an increase in the various goods and services, then that is not inflation. It has to be an increase in the general price level. They say here the price level refers to average level of all prices in the economy, right? Hence, the increase must apply to prices in general. Increase in prices of individual goods or services do not constitute inflation, right? So it has to be an increase in the various goods and services. Hope you guys got that. And then we have I'm just passing G. So you can see here that from 2019 to 2021, we experienced deflation, right? Because you can see that the inflation rate was 4.1. Is it the inflation, annual inflation rate, CPI for South Africa? So it was 4.1, 3.4. So it kept on decreasing, and then we experienced inflation from 2021 going to 2023. Then we had deflation also in 2024 from 2023 because the CPI was the inflation decreased. You can see here. And then measuring inflation. So remember from the learning outcome, we said that we need to understand um the measures of inflation. So the first one is consumer price index, right? So with the consumer price index, um this one, it measures the general increase in the price level, but now it focuses on the prices which are experienced by the consumers, right? It measures the increase in the price level, general price level, obviously meaning that various goods and services, but now focusing on the what? On the prices which are experienced by what? By the consumers, right? I had highlighted some things here. I don't know why it's not highlighted here. But I'm just going to read here. Since inflation is a continuous and a continued increase in general price level, there's a need for, yeah, okay. The most commonly used indicator of general price level is the consumer price index, which measures the average cost of goods and services that are bought by average South African consumers. So as I already mentioned here that with the CPI, it just like, it measures the increase in the price level, but now it looks at the the consumers, like the goods, and it looks at the prices of goods which are purchased by the consumers, right, for final consumption. Which is why with the CPI, we have a consumer basket, right, which basically consists of goods and of goods that consumers buy on a regular basis, right? That is how the CPI is constructed, or kahle kahle, in simple terms, that is how the CPI is constructed, right? So Statistics South Africa, what they would do is that they will conduct a survey basically to find out ukuthi what are the goods that consumers spend most of their income on and that they buy on a regular basis, right? And then they'll okay, then after having those goods, okay, they group them in what is called the consumer basket, right? Which basically consists of goods that we buy on a regular basis and we spend most of our income on. So in the consumer basket, you'll find goods like cigarettes, you find goods like maize meal, bread, alcohol, and all of that, right? In a consumer basket. And then they then like take those goods and then they weigh them and then they come up with a CPI figure, right? And then that CPI figure is then used now to measure this general price level, right? To calculate inflation, right? Okay, I hope I did not confuse anyone. But now with in regards to this slide, okay, I was just like explaining how the consumer price index is constructed, right? Using the consumer basket. But then what you have to know is that with the CPI, it measures the average cost of goods that are bought by consumers, right? We looking at the at the inflation. Basically, we want to determine the consumer inflation with the CPI, right? We're trying to calculate the inflation that is experienced by what? By the we want to determine the consumer inflation, which is the increase in the prices of goods and services that are bought by consumers, right? Okay, I hope I didn't confuse anyone. Here they're saying, okay. the consumer basket. They're basically saying what I just said, Uti. Statistics South Africa will would identify the product which households spend most of their money on, and these goods will then form part of the basket, right? The consumer basket. And then from that basket, they'll then weigh the basket and then come up with a CPI figure, which then that CPI figure will then be used to do what to calculate inflation. And that is the what and that will be what the consumer inflation, the inflation that is experienced by what? By the consumers, right? When you're calculating the CPI, right? And then we have two ways of calculating the CPI. We can use YOY, which is year on year, or month on the same month a year ago, right? So with the YOY, we're basically calculating the CPI. Let's say we're calculating the CPI for this year. Let me just use this one. We're calculating the CPI for 2013, right? So we're gonna take the CPI for 2013 minus the CPI for the previous year divided by the CPI of the previous year times 100, right? It's the CPI for this year minus for last year divided by last year, right? That is year on year. So we can calculate here for 2014, you can just say 103.3 minus 103.3 divided by 103.3 times 100. Right, let me just go back. Let me just go to the slides. Here, they've already calculated for us. You can see that here the inflation was 0 because the CPI it is constant, meaning that the prices, the general price level of consumer goods, it stayed the same. The CPI remained the same. You can see it was 103.3 and 103.3. So there were no increase in the general price level in 2013 to 2014, right? The inflation was 0.00. And then in 2015, you can see now from 103.3 to 107.2, the CPI. So this reflects to okay, there was an increase in the general price level, right? And then so there was an increase in the prices of goods which are bought by consumers, right? Because the CPI, it looks at the what? It looks at the consumers, right? It measures the cost of goods services that are bought by consumers, right? So you can see now there was an increase there in those prices. So to calculate the inflation, we're gonna say the CPI for 2015, which is 107.2, minus the previous year's CPI, which is 103.3, divided by the previous year's CPI, which is 103.3 times 100, then we got 3.78. Right. You can see now if the CPI is increasing, also the inflation rate increases from 10. Okay, it decreased here, then now we start to increase from 0 to 3, and then it's decreasing here to 1. The inflation decreased from 3 to 1, obviously because you can see we had 107, 108.5. It's 108.5 minus 107 divided by 107.2 to the 100, 10.21. So the inflation rate decreased here, even though the consumer price index increased. Okay, but then guys, you know how to, with the year on year, to calculate inflation, you just say the CPI for this year minus the CPI for the previous year divided by the CPI for the previous year, right? Then you get the inflation rate, right, for that year. So it's this year minus last year divided by last year times 100 to get the inflation rate. And then these were the exercises. You also have another method to calculate the inflation. Another method to calculate inflation is the month on the same month previous year, right? So with this method, if you're calculating inflation, so for example here, they're calculating inflation for 2006 January, right? So To calculate the inflation, you're going to take the CPI for 2006 January minus the CPI for the previous year, obviously. Also for the previous year's same month that you're calculating for. So since they're calculating for January, they're going to take the previous year's January CPI. Right, you can see that it's 2005 January divided by last year's um January CPI, right? So it's just the same formula. It's just that with this one, you're using the month. So you have to be careful if it's the month on the same month. You need to be careful to not just take the previous year's CPI, but look for the previous year's CPI, and also the month has to be the same. So if you're calculating for January, look also for 2005 January, right, as they did here. So it's obviously it's CPI this year minus CPI last year divided by CPI last year, right? Previous year, I mean. And then also be careful of the words of the months. So if you're calculating for April, you're going to say CPI 2006 April minus CPI 2005 April divided by CPI 2005 April times 100 to get your inflation rate. So they've also calculated for us here. So you just take for February 2006, so you're going to take the 2006 CPI. You're going to take the 2006 CPI, which is 101.3. You're going to subtract the 2005 CPI, 96.8. You're going to divide the 2005 CPI, 96.8, and you're going to multiply by 100, and you're going to get, I'm getting 4.6. 110, oh, I said 101. Okay, 102, yeah, and then you're going to get 5.89, right? So you just take, when you're calculating the CPI using month on the same month, the only thing you have to be careful for is that you take the month for this year that you're calculating for, and then you need to subtract for the last year, but then the month has to be the same, right? So it's CPI this year minus CPI last year divided by CPI last year. But then also be careful of if this year you're calculating for March, you're going to take March minus last year's March CPI divided by last year's March CPI to get this amount, the inflation rate, right? So you have two ways to calculate the inflation rate using the CPI. You can use the year on year, whereby now you say CPI this year minus CPI last year divided by CPI last year times 100. You can use month on the same month method, where you say CPI for this year. For example, calculating for January, I'm gonna say this month for 2025 January minus CPI for 2024 January divided by CPI for 2024 January times 100, right? And then measuring inflation. So you can also measure inflation using the producer price index. The producer price index, remember with the consumer price index, the CPI, I said that that is the index which now it measures inflation. It helps to determine the consumer inflation, right? Where now it measures the cost of goods that are bought by what? By the consumers, right? We want to calculate the increase in the prices of goods and services that are bought by what? By the consumers. While with the PPI now, it looks at the producer's side, right? The consumer price index, it look at the consumers. Hence, we have to like construct that consumers baskets and all of that, and then measure the prices in the consumer basket, right, of those goods in the consumer basket, and then come up with that CPI figure, which is then used to calculate inflation, which then that will determine what the consumer inflation, right? With the producer price index now, it looks at the what? At the prices which are experienced by the what? By the producers, right? It looks at the increase in the prices that are experienced by what? By the producers. So they're saying that here at the beginning that the PPI measures changes in the prices in the early stages of production before those changes filter through the household. And the PPI is used to measure inflation, the inflation of prices that are experienced by the producers of commodities, right? So the PPI is just it looks at the cost of production, right? The prices that obviously with the producers spend on capital goods, right? While we spend the consumers, they spend their income on what? On consumer goods, right? The final goods and services that they purchased for final consumption, right? So with the consumer price index, we are basically we measure the inflation of the prices which are expressed by what? By the consumers when they purchase those consumer goods and services. But now with the producers, now we want to look at the prices that are experienced by consumers when they are purchasing those capital goods that are going to be used in the production process. Right. Also look at their intermediate goods also because they are used as inputs in the production process. Right. So the PPI, it just measures the inflation of prices which are explained by the producers. Right. It looks at the what? At the cost of production. Obviously, in order to produce these goods and services, the producers have to like buy capital equipment. They have to buy intermediate goods which are going to be used in their production process. Right. So the difference between the consumer price index and the producer price index is that with the consumer price index, we are basically looking at the prices which are um at the prices that are experienced by the consumers, and then on the producer side, we're looking at the prices that are experienced by the producers, right? So here are the differences. With the consumer, they say it pertains the cost of living, right? So producer price index pertains the cost of living because now if you calculate our CPI and we get, for instance, like here, our CPI was I'm just going to compare January to January. You can see it was 95.2, and then here it's 100.3. So you can see that the prices have increased. So meaning that now it is more expensive to buy goods in 2026 than in 2025. So the cost of living has increased. Like it is more expensive now in 2026 to afford these goods and services, right? For the consumers. Right, so it pertains the cost of living. And with the producer price index, it pertains the cost of production, obviously, because it looks at the prices that are experienced by producers when they when they want to purchase these inputs that they're going to use within their production process. Right. So it pertains to the cost of production because in order for them to purchase these inputs again, it it's a cost for them. Right. It's the cost of production to produce these things. These are the costs that they incur. So now it looks at the prices that they have to pay for these products in order for production to take place. Right. So producer price index, it pertains to the cost of production, while with the consumer, it pertains to the cost of living. Right. Are we able to afford these goods and services, right? And then the basket for consumer price index, it consists of consumer goods and services. Obviously, I've already mentioned Uti, it consumer goods, obviously, because like with us, like the consumers, we purchase goods that we're going to use for consumption, right? And then with the producers, the basket will consist of goods only and there are no services. And then with the consumer price index, it also consists of capital and intermediate goods. No, capital and intermediate goods are excluded. So with the consumer price index, obviously we capital goods and intermediate goods, those are used by what? By the producers in the production process in order to produce some final goods and services, right? So it is excluded from the consumer price index. We only focus on the goods that we purchase here for final consumption. And then the capital and intermediate goods, it's the producers, they buy these goods. Obviously, the prices of these goods have to be included because we have to know, okay, are the capital goods increasing, like your machinery, the prices, I mean, of capital goods, your machinery, your equipment, are they increasing, as well as the intermediate goods, right? Remember that the intermediate goods are those goods that are used as inputs in the production process, right? To produce other goods, right? For instance, you can take your flour. Um, if it is used to bake cake, then it becomes an intermediate good because you're using it to produce something else, right? So those capital goods again, they're included in the producer price index, right? And then for consumer price index, prices include VAT, obviously valid because when we purchase these goods from the market, they have VAT, right? And then with the producer price index, it excludes VAT. So you just have to know these differences. And yeah, I think the first ones are quite easy. With the consumer price index, we look at it pertains the cost of living, and then producer price index is just the cost of production, obviously because it looks at the producer's side, right? The prices that are experienced by the producers when they of the commodities like that they use in the production process, right? Pertains the cost of living because now it looks at the goods that we purchased. If they can see it's okay, the CPI has increased. The CPI has increased. It means that now the price of goods and services have increased, which means now it is it becomes expensive for us to afford other goods and services, right? Which is going to tell us more about the cost of living, right? I don't know if I explained that well. And then consumer goods, obviously, this one is quite easy to say because with the consumer price index, consumer goods and services are included, but the producer price index, it only consists of goods. And then also this one, with the consumer price index, capital goods and intermediate goods are excluded. Because Tina, remember we purchase our consumer goods for final consumption. So capital and intermediate goods, they're included in the producer price index, right? Because they use these goods, right, in their production process, right? And then these ones prices include VAT, obviously because we have consumer goods, right? These goods they have VAT. And then producer price index exclude VAT. And then we also have GDP deflator, which is a measure of inflation also. So with the with the GDP deflator now, remember, okay, let me take you back. So the CPI, we said Uguti, it just we're looking at it determines the inflation that is it determines consumer inflation, right? Because it looks at the prices of goods and services, which are general increase in the price of goods and services that are experienced by what? By consumers. And then with the PPI, it looks at the producer side, right? The general increase in the price of goods and services that are experienced by what? By the producers. That is the PPI. So now for the GDP deflator, it just looks at GDP. GDP should tell you now we're looking at what? At all goods and services. Because remember GDP, remember the definition of GDP, it says that it is the total market value of final goods and services produced in the boundaries of a country at a specific period of time. So it's the total market value of all final goods and services. So now the GDP deflator, it measures the average or here it measures on average the prices of all goods and services included in the what? In the GDP. So the GDP deflator now we're looking at all the goods and services that have been produced in the borders of the country in a specific period of time. Right. So the GDP deflator shows the difference between nominal and real GDP in a particular year. So here with the GDP deflator, we basically want to know what happened to the prices of all goods and services that are produced in the economy for that particular year or for that particular period, right? Want to look at the prices of what? Of all goods and services. CPI, we're just looking at the consumer basket, which is more we just like want to focus more on the prices which are experienced by the what by the consumers. PPI more on the prices that are experienced by what by the producers. But now the GDP deflator, it just look at all goods in the economy, right? The prices of what of all goods that are produced in the economy. And then now to calculate the GDP deflator, you basically say nominal GDP divided by real GDP for that year. So as you can see here, they're calculating the GDP deflator for 2000, for 200, for 2005. Let's just say 2005. Let's use this one for 2005. So you're going to say nominal GDP for 2005 divided by real GDP for 2005. Right, and you're going to times 100, you're going to get you the GDP deflator. Then after you have your GDP deflator, then you're going to use it now to do what? To calculate inflation. Right. So the GDP deflator will just give us an idea of whether the the prices of all goods and services have increased in the economy and then or they've decreased and then so calculating inflation now we're trying to find out so it's okay by how much was that increase in terms of inflation, right? So Yeah, we so to measure inflation, we use the CPI, we use the PPI, and also use the GDP deflator, right? So you say nominal GDP. Ke ukuthi nominal GDP is just like we calculate we use with the nominal GDP, we calculate GDP using what? Using the market prices or the current prices. And with the real GDP, we calculate GDP using what? The constant constant prices. And in giving the explanation definitions of nominal GDP and real GDP, our lecturer made a funny joke in class. I don't remember it very well, but then he was saying that when in our test, like test one, we couldn't define these two. People were saying nominal GDP, current price, real price. So I just Okay, I think that what we have to do, because I also did the same thing, but then he said he gave us a mark. So what I think we have to do is just like start from, because nominal GDP, right? Maybe we can say something like, explain GDP first and then give examples. So not to say, okay, like for example, he said that you were asked, okay, what is nominal GDP? And a person would just say, current price or market price, right? But you still get marked. But then, okay, I feel like we have to do something like firstly explain GDP and then give an example of to say the current price. Okay, like this, guys, because I can't even explain this. Okay, we can say it's okay, GDP, nominal GDP. Okay, nominal GDP, it refers to the total market value. Like start by explaining GDP. So you can say it refers to the total market value of final goods and services produced within the borders of the country in a specific period of time, calculated using current prices or um market prices, and they are um not adjusted for inflation, right? Like you can say something like that. And then you can say it's okay, real GDP, and also with real GDP, we can do the same thing. Start by explaining GDP. So we can say that um um real GDP, it refers to the total market value of all final goods and services produced within the borders of the country in a specific period of time, calculated using constant prices, and prices are adjusted for inflation. Right. I think in that case, like the lecturer can say, was okay, no, you understand what you're talking about, even though you just gave an example and explained what GDP is, you know. But yeah, okay, guys. So here I was saying that with the GDP deflator, to calculate it, you just say nominal GDP divided by what? By real GDP, right? Yeah, and then the GDP deflator, we are looking at the prices of all goods and services included in the GDP, with the CPI, just the goods that are the prices of goods and services experienced by, sorry, the prices um of goods which are experienced um by the consumers. And then on this side, it's it is the prices which are experienced by what? By the producers, right? And then GDP deflator, now we're looking at all goods and services. And you have to know the formula for this. For the GDP deflator, you just say nominal GDP divided by real GDP times 100. And then now to get inflation, you should say GDP deflator for this year minus previous year divided by previous year times 100. So I feel like the calculation is the same. Remember, guys, with the CPI, it was also like CPI for this year minus last year divided by last year. Remember, see here. Okay, even here it's the same thing. CPI this year minus last year divided by last year times 100. So it mustn't be difficult to remember these formulas. Whether you're using the CPI or using the GDP deflator, still the same thing. It's just that if you're calculating inflation using the CPI, it's going to be the CPI this year minus CPI last year divided by CPI last year. If it's using the GDP deflator, it's going to be GDP deflator this year minus GDP deflator last year divided by GDP deflator last year times 100. And also if now it's the CPI but using the month on the same month method, don't forget to also take note of the months. So they're calculating the GDP deflator for us. So for GDP deflator for 2005, we're gonna say nominal GDP times real GDP. sorry, not times. I'm gonna say nominal GDP for this year divided by real GDP. You're gonna get your times 100. Okay, times 100, you're gonna get your GDP deflator. Then now to get inflation, you're gonna get, okay, and calculate the GDP deflator 40 for 2006. Say nominal GDP divided by real GDP times 100, you get this one. Then now to calculate your inflation, you're gonna say inflation for this year, 123.61 minus inflation for last year, previous year, let me just say previous year, 122.15 divided by 122.15 times 100, you're gonna get 1.20 and so on, right? And then we also have now the causes of inflation, right? What causes inflation? So we have a demand pull inflation, right? So the demand pull inflation, this is the inflation that occurs because of an increase in what? In aggregate demand, right? It occurs when aggregate demand for goods and services increases. Aggregate, right? Remember aggregate, we said it's total, right? Because now we're looking at macro economy. So we're looking at the economy as a whole, right? So we're looking at aggregate what demand. So an increase in the aggregate demand for goods and services, that will cause what? A demand pull inflation. And usually the aggregate demand, an increase in the aggregate demand will be caused by too much money in circulation, right? When there is too much money in circulation, meaning that now people have more money. Obviously, if you have more money, your demand will start to increase, right? Which will then increase the demand curve from AD0 to AD1, from AD1 to AD2 until here at YF. You can see that also the production, total production and income was also increasing when the aggregate demand was increasing for goods, right? Probably because now the interest rates are low, so people can borrow money, and having more money in their hands, they then now demand more goods and services. So as the demand is increasing, the aggregate demand is increasing, also the price is increasing, right? From P0 to P1, when aggregate demand increased from AD0 to AD1, you can see. And also the production and income increased from Y0 to Y1, right? Also now the production is increasing obviously as well as the income. This is income which is earned by the factors of production, right? That are used, obviously the factors of production which are used in the production process. So as the production is increasing and the income is increasing, as the production is increasing, more factors of production have to be employed, right? More laborers have to be employed, more machinery have to be employed. Employed, sometimes it means that you have to buy them, like more machinery have to be bought, right? In order to increase the production. So which increase was the income which is earned by the factors of production, right? You can see that here, Y0, Y1, YF. So also the prices are what are increasing because of an increase in what in aggregate demand until here at YF. So you can see now here at YF that the production and income no longer increases, right? So this is where we say, Guti, we have reached full employment, right? This is a full employment level because at this point we can no longer employ, can no longer increase our factors of production, right? Hence our production is also does not increase here because we can no longer increase our factors of production. We can no longer employ more labor. We can no longer employ more capital and so on. So production is constant, but because now people have more disposable income, people have money, you can see aggregate demand keeps increasing from AD2 at full employment where the price is P2 to where to AD3 here, right? And also you see that now the price keeps on increasing also even at full employment, right? So aggregate, an increase in demand pull inflation is just caused by an increase in aggregate demand, where now the demand for goods and services keeps on increasing, right? That is what you have to know with this, with regards to this graph and demand pull inflation. Is there anything else? Let's see. Okay. This is shown by a Radway shift AD curve AD1. 82, 83. At below full employment, increase in aggregate demand results in an increase in both price level and production and income. So you can see that at below full employment, at below this point here, when there's an increase in aggregate demand, it increases what? The production and income, and also it increases what? The price, right? At below YF, full employment. And then after full employment, so when we hear level YF, an increase in aggregate demand, it leads to an increase in the prices only. So if aggregate demand continue to increase here, it's just going to lead to an increase in the what? In the prices only, which causes what? Demand pull inflation, right? So demand pull inflation, demand, so it's caused by what? An increase in what? Aggregate demand, right? Demand pull inflation is caused by an increase in what? Aggregate demand for goods and services. And then we have the causes of demand pull inflation. So they're saying that the cause of demand pull inflation can be an increase in any component of the GDP. You know, the component of GDP is your C plus I plus G plus X. So if there's an increase in any of those component, consumption expenditure increase, government expenditure increase, investment, it's going to lead to an increase in it's going to lead to a demand pull inflation. An increase in money supply, and a decrease in the interest rates. Okay, I'm going to explain these two together because I feel like they work together. So with the okay, so you know that the I don't want to say the company, but like the people that control money in South Africa is the South African Reserve Bank, right? So the instrument that they use to control money is the interest rate, right? And and how they do that is that so you know we have like your commercial banks, right, which are your Absa, Capitec, and all of that. Those are your commercial banks. And um, okay, we keep our money with the commercial banks, right? With Absa and all of them. And they keep their money with the what? With the South African Reserve Bank, right? So the money of the banks is kept with the South African Reserve Bank, and our money is kept at the commercial banks, right? So when the South African Reserve Bank want to increase money supply in increase money supply, which is the money that is in circulation, that is in the economy. What they would do is that the interest rates which is charged by commercial bank is the repo rate, right? If I'm not mistaken. So the the Reserve Bank will do what? They will decrease the um repo rate, right, which is the interest rate which is paid by ama commercial banks to South African Reserve Bank, right, for keeping their money, obviously. And then the commercial banks will also decrease the interest rate, right, which is the rate that we pay also now when you're borrowing money and from the commercial banks. So if the interest rate is decreased, and the repo rate also is decreased, it increases the money it increases money supply, which is the money in circulation, because it becomes cheaper now to borrow money because there's a decrease in the interest rate, right? Ish, I hope you guys are not gonna confuse you, but yeah, it's something like that. So now if there's a decrease in the interest rate, it becomes cheaper to borrow money, cheaper credit, and on and on. So then now does what? It makes us to go and borrow more money. And we can borrow money, we can start businesses, we can borrow money, we can spend that money, and that increases what's aggregate demand for goods and services because we have more money, right? We have money that we are holding. There's more money in circulation, right? That would lead to what? To demand pull inflation because aggregate demand for goods and services is going to increase due to cheaper credits and cheaper what? Yeah. Do you guys get that? So what I'm saying basically is that okay, so increase in money supply. So if there's an increase in money supply, if there's more money in circulation, right, because of maybe a decrease in the interest rate, right? Obviously, if there's a decrease in the interest rate, it becomes cheaper for us to borrow money, right? And then now we're going to have more money in our hands. And then obviously when you have money, you're going to demand goods and services, right? So your demand for goods and services is going to increase, which will then lead to what? To demand pull inflation because this would happen. The aggregate demand will increase and the prices will keep on what? Increasing, right? Leading to demand pull inflation. Also have a decrease in taxation. So obviously, if the tax increase, you have more disposable income, right? You have more money to use now. So your aggregate demand is going to increase, which will lead to demand pull inflation, right? We also have cost push inflation. So with the demand pull inflation, guys, it is caused by an increase in the aggregate demand for goods and services. And then these are the causes: increase in the components of GDP, an increase in money supply, decrease in interest rates, and a decrease in taxation. Anything that will cause people to have more money in their hands, it will lead to an increase in aggregate demand, which will lead to demand pull inflation. Right? Because taxation, if tax is decreased, guys, if there's a decrease in taxation, if you are earning maybe like 500 rand and your tax was 200 rand. So now if there's a decrease in tax, now the tax is 100 rand. It means now you have 100 rand more, right? Because you used to spend 300 rand, now you can spend 400 rand. So your aggregate your demand is going to increase, right? So now if there is a decrease in taxation for everyone in the economy, it will then lead to an increase in what? In aggregate demand, in total demand, right? Because most people now would have more money to spend. Also look at the cost push inflation. So the cost push inflation is just the inflation that occurs because of an increase in the what? In the cost of production. Right. So this one looks at an increase in the what? In the cost of production. So if the inputs which is used in the production process, if they become expensive, what's going to happen is that, remember, we just want to show you guys something. Remember our graphs, they increase on this let me try this one. They increase on this side and they decrease on this side. All our graphs, right? They decrease on this side and they increase on this side. So you can see here with the aggregate supply. So with our aggregate supply, it moved from AS1 to AS2, meaning that the supply is increasing. Is decreasing. The supply of goods is what is decreasing, right? So cost push inflation is caused by an increase in the what? In the cost of production. So when inputs are increasing, the prices of inputs, the prices of goods which are used in the production process, like your capital goods and your intermediate goods, if the price of those goods are increasing, it's going to lead to an increase in the cost of production, which will then reduce our aggregate supply, total supply, aggregate for total. So the total supply will decrease from Y1, which is AS1 curve, to here to AS2, right, to Y2. So you can see now that if there's a decrease in supply, the prices are going to increase, right? Automatically, you can see the prices are going to increase. Obviously, because to generalize this also, if if the remember we said this one is caused by an increase in the cost of production, right? And I said that it is an increase in the inputs or the intermediate goods or the capital goods which are used in the production process. If their prices increases, it's going to put a strain on the producers, and then their production will decrease, right? And because now the intermediate goods, the prices for intermediate goods has increased. To recover that increase, like those costs, they would have to charge higher prices so that they can be able to cover for those costs, right? So yeah, the prices were going to increase, and then you can see here that the production is going to decrease. Obviously, because now it is expensive to produce goods and services because of an increase in intermediate goods, capital goods, and so on. Like, right. So the production and income is going to decrease. Also, the factors of production, some of them will not be employed. For example, maybe there would be a machinery that will not be used, and some labors will be retrenched, right? Because now the cost of production has increased. So to try and reduce the cost, we have to like not use all the machineries because maybe they are eating electricity, and maybe we have to retrain some of the workers because they don't have money to pay them to cover their salaries, right? So you can see now the production is also decreasing as well as the income. Income for the factors of production is also decreasing from Y1 to Y2, right? And this is called stagflation because you can see the prices of goods is increasing and what production and income is decreasing. We can associate this with the what? With the unemployment. Because I remember I said that some of the factors of production will be unemployed here, right? Since the income is going to decrease, some of the effects of production will be unemployed, such as if you had like 3 machines in your business, right? And now the cost of production has increased. Even the electricity is increasing and all of that, right? So maybe you'd have to now use maybe 2 machines instead of 3. So this one is not employed because you're using 2 now. And also with the workers, the laborers, maybe you'd have to retrench 5 workers, right, to reduce your cost. So that increases what's the unemployment rate. And you remember when we're doing the Phillips curve, we said that where inflation is increasing and unemployment is also increasing, we have what we called stagflation, right? But here, what you have to know is just that with the cost push inflation, it is caused by an increase in the cost of production, right? Which then causes the production and income to decrease and also the prices to increase. Yeah. Let me try to remove this. And then now we look at I miss my notes, those with that one that we highlighted. But it's fine. Okay, so we have cost push inflation, the causes. So what now will cause the cost push inflation, right? So remember we said that it's an increase in the cost of production. So we have an increase in the wages and salaries, right? So if the wages and salaries increase, it increases the cost of production. I've already said this one where I said to team here, where I said that with the income, it relates to the income which is earned by the effects of production, right? So if the production is increasing, some workers will need to be retrenched, right? So if the income is increasing, no, if the production is decreasing because of an increase in the cost of production, right? So if the cost of production increases, production will have to be decreased. And also income will decrease, which is income which is earned by the factor of production, right? We'd have to retrench some workers here, right? And there will be other factors of production that will be unemployed, right? Because we are trying to do what? We're trying to reduce our cost of production, right? So increase in the wages and salaries, it will lead to cost push inflation because it increases the cost of production, right? And then it increases the cost of production. Obviously, it becomes expensive, then agri supply decreases, yeah. And then we have increase in imported capital and immediate goods. So, oh my God, I miss my notes when it comes to this one, but I'll just try to explain it. So, increase in imported capital and intermediate goods. So you know that some of the capital and intermediate goods which is used in the production process, um, some of those goods are what are imported, right? So if there's an increase now in the goods which are imported, it increases the cost of production. So to buy, remember imports, it's like us buying from the rest of the world, right? So now for us to buy like those goods that we need in our production process, it and the if the price, I mean, if the price for those goods which are used in the production process increases, it will then increase what? The cost of production, right? Which will lead to what? To a decrease in the aggregate supply, in the production, right? From here to here, which then causes an increase in what? In the price, right? Also an increase in the profit margins. Um, Increase in profit margins is like the company is trying to produce more goods and services so that they can um increase their profit, right? So obviously now they're going to produce more goods and services, and to try and get more profit, they'll charge higher prices, right? And also in trying to produce more goods and services, that will increase what? Their cost of production. Because they would have to buy more per intermediate goods, which are going to be used to increase the quantities of goods that are going to be produced, right? So that will lead towards an increase in the cost of production and an increase in the price, which will cause cost push inflation. A decrease in productivity, this one is self-explanatory because you can see here there was a decrease in production and there was an increase in the price, right? So a decrease in the production will cause a what? An increase in the prices, which then is one of the causes of what? Cost push inflation, right? Which leads to cost push inflation. Then we also have natural disasters. So you know, when there are natural disasters, it's maybe like let's say you have your farm and then there's a flood, some of your crops they are damaged. That will increase the cost of production because now you'd have to buy what do you use? But to buy seeds. Seed, yeah, you need to like spend more money to buy like seeds in order now to plant them and then grow your crops again. So that will increase what your cost of production also, the natural disaster. So with the ones that you have, with the ones that did not get damaged, you'd have to increase the prices of those ones. So that Pella, you can now use the money to buy more seeds and then plant more crops and whatever you yeah. So you guys got the cost push inflation is just caused by an increase in the cost of production. You see, it's cost push and it's caused by what? An increase in the cost of production, right? Where we said which we have things like increase in wages and salaries, and then which increase the cost of production, increase in imported and capital goods, increase in profit margins, decrease in productivity, and natural disasters, right? And then also have the effects of inflation. So now what are the effects of inflation? So we talk about now the causes, the cause of inflation. We have the types of inflation. I mean, we have demand pull inflation, we have cost push inflation. So now what are the effects again of this cost push inflation and demand pull inflation? Right. So effect of inflation, we have distributional effect, creditors, savers, fixed deposit holders. Lose if interest rates are not adjusted. So what they say here is that if for the creditors and the savers, those that have saved their money and those that they save their money in the fixed deposit, they will lose if the interest rates are not adjusted. So let's say now we have inflation. Okay, let me just make an example. Um, let's say um let's say you buy a jacket, right? And you buy a pink jacket for 500 rand, right? And then let's say you don't like that jacket, you wanted to buy a black one. And then okay, no, let's say your mom bought you a pink jacket and you initially you wanted a black one, but she bought you a pink jacket. And me not because I love pink, I'm like, okay, can I buy the jacket from you? And then you sell it to me for 500 rand, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to pay you, and then you're gonna buy a black one, right? The price is still the same. The black one also costs 500 rand. So I buy the jacket from you, the pink jacket from you, and then I don't give you 500 right now. Maybe I pay you maybe after a few months, and maybe after a few months we have experienced inflation, right? Prices have increased, and that jacket no longer costs now 500 rand. Maybe it's now cost 700 rand. Right. So Mina, I bought it from you for 500 rand. So now when I pay you after inflation, after prices have increased, now the jacket is costing what? 700 rand. And Mina, I'm going to pay you how much? I'm going to pay you 500 rand. So you can see now that your 500 rand has lost value at compared to when I bought the jacket from you or when your mom bought it. Right. I don't know if this makes sense, but you're going to lose, obviously, because when I pay you the 500 rand after 3 months, after we have experienced increase in the prices, the same 500 rand no longer has the same value that it had back then. Right? For you to even like buy that same jacket now, you need to add 200 rand extra. Because I'm gonna give you the same 500 rand that I took your jacket for, right? So it's something like that. As a creditor, as a person that you have given me the jacket, right? Your jacket, you are going to lose if the interest rates are not adjusted for inflation, right? You're going to lose. And then also if you are a saver, if you're saving your money there and your interest rate is like 20%. Oh no, let me say the interest rate is 20 rand on your saving. You are saving I just on a small figures, you're saving 100 rand and the interest rate is 20 rand. So you're gonna get 120. So for now, you're gonna get 120, right? But now as time goes by, we experience inflation and prices increase. So with that 120, maybe let's say you could afford maybe a calculator, right? With that 120. But now after inflation, when the prices have increased, you were say okay, let's say you were saving for a calculator initially, and then you were saving, and your interest was going to be 20 rand, right? So you after like that period to get that you're saving for, you are going to get your amount, which will be 120, right? And you're going to buy a calculator. But with inflation, after let's say after a few months again, inflation occurs, prices increase, and the same calculator that you want to buy, it now cost 300 rand. Right. So you're going to lose even though your money was saved because it the value of money has increased. The value of the money, yeah, the money that you have does not have value anymore because the value of that money has decreased now because it cannot afford you that same product or that same calculator that you initially were saving for, right? Yeah, guys, but it's something like that. So creditors, savers, and fixed deposit holders, they will lose if interest rates are not adjusted for inflation. Then debtors benefit. So as a debtor, remember my first example, I buy a jacket from you, a pink jacket, right? After inflation, like after prices have increased, 500 rand no longer has value, right? So I mean, as a debtor, I'm gonna benefit because I'm gonna give you 500 rand, money that no longer has value at that time because your jacket is no longer 500 rand, but rather is what 700 rand at that time, right? So I'm going to benefit because the real value of their loans decrease as price rises, right? So the real value of my loan in this case was the 500 rand because I had to pay you 500 rand for the jacket. It's going to decrease because the prices have increased, right? And then producers benefit. The producers, they benefit if the prices rise faster than the cost. So if the price of goods and services keep increasing because of inflation, obviously the producers are going to benefit because um the prices are high. This one is self-explanatory, guys, because prices are high, obviously the producers are gonna benefit, right? Taxpayers will lose. So taxpayers will lose if let's say the salaries and wages are adjusted with inflation, right? Let's say the inflation rate increases and then also their salaries are also adjusted, they're also increased, right? So if that happens, you know that in South Africa we use the progressive tax system, which basically says that higher income earners they pay more. So meaning that like in simple terms, if you are you pay tax in according to what you're earning, right? So a person which is earning 100 rand is not charged the same amount of tax compared to the person that is earning 1,000, right? So the tax is charged in according to your salary. So now for taxpayers, if the inflation rate increases, their salaries and now their salaries are also adjusted with inflation, meaning that their salaries also increase. It is going to mean that even their tax that they're going to pay is going to increase, right? Because we're using the progressive tax system. So the taxpayers in this case, they would do what? They would lose, right? Those are the effects of inflation. And then government is going to benefit through fiscal dividends, meaning that the revenue from taxation, yeah, because of an increase in the revenue from taxation, right? Because now we're paying tax, right? And because our salaries are increased together, I'm saying our, but it's fine. Because our salaries are increased together with the increase in the inflation rate, it means that even our tax is going to increase, right? Meaning that the government revenue from taxation will increase also. Right, so the government will benefit. Right. Yeah, let's move on. I hope you guys got this one. We also have economic effects. Oh, those are the distribution effects, right? So now we're looking at the economic effect. So economic effect, it's falling real income. But see, inflation erodes the purchasing power of money if wages are not adjusted for price increase. So I had to Google this word. Erodes, it basically means it weakens or diminishes, right? So inflation, an increase in the prices, it diminishes the purchasing power of money. Remember with the example I made, Uti, if you are if I give you your 500 rand back after 3 months when there has been like increase in prices, the 500 rand does not have power anymore, right? So inflation does what? It weakens the purchasing power of money, right? If wages are not adjusted for price increases. And then wage price spiral, this one just referred to a continuous increase in the prices. Remember I said that if inflation increases, wages and salaries might be adjusted for inflation, right? It's not always the case. So if they are increased with the increased inflation, it's going to lead to a continuous increase because the price are also going to increase because remember, if if the wages increases with an increase in the inflation, demand also increase, which will increase what? Aggregate demand for goods and services. And remember, aggregate demand will do what? It will cause what? Demand pull inflation. And then prices increase, then wages are also adjusted. So it just leads to a continuous increase in the prices and in the wages, right? Also, negative real interest rate. They're saying that if interest rates on saving is lower than inflation, this is where now you have your money saved and then the interest rate you are getting is lower than the inflation rate. It is also part of the economic effect. And then increases inequality. This one is also self-explanatory, guys, because if prices keep increasing, it like for especially for low income earners and for the poor people, I don't want to say poor people, but like yeah, for those people that are getting, let me say like those that are on pension, for example, their salaries, is it a salary, is fixed. The amount that they receive is fixed, right? Regardless of an increase in prices or whatsoever, their price are but their income is not adjusted for inflation, right? So if prices keep on increasing for those people, it becomes they become worse off because it becomes difficult for them to afford goods and services, right? Yeah, they say here it affects low income households the most as they hold most of their wealth in cash. Okay, but also the example I made to say that it increases inequalities because now the poor people they become worse off, and the gap between the rich and the poor now it becomes wide, right? And then you also have business uncertainty, lowers investors' business confidence and discourages investment. Obviously, you can't invest in a country which is experiencing inflation, right? So it lowers investors' business confidence and discourages investment. And then lower international competitiveness. Obviously this one also because remember, if prices are high, if we have inflation, it's going to lower the demand for exports, meaning that remember we if our goods if we have inflation, right, it means that our goods are expensive. So for people that we are selling to outside, for them to buy these goods, they would have to pay a high amount, right? Because these prices have what inflation in them. So it's going to discourage them to buy our product because they are expensive, right? Because the prices are high, right? So it's going to lower the demand for export. Remember, export, it's when we are selling to the rest of the world, right? So if we have inflation, if the prices are high, it's going to lower the demand for exports and increase the demand for imports also. Because now in our economy, right, we have inflation, prices are high, right? And then us, we're going to say, no, I'm not going to buy from Mr. Price. The prices are too high. Let me import my clothes from Shein, right? So it's going to increase the demand for imports. You're going to start buying from outside because the prices here are high, right? And then leading to currency depreciation. Obviously, if more of our currency is going out, is leaving the economy because we are demanding more of foreign products. And if we're demanding more of their products, and it's we are buying with our rand, and the more of our rand is going out, it would lead to a currency depreciation. The value of our currency depreciates, right? It loses its value, right? So yeah. We also have effect of inflation. We have economic effects. Other effect, economic effect, which cost of borrowing. So with inflation, if the interest rate tends to rise in inflationary economies. So if the interest rates are rising, it becomes very difficult to borrow money. Obviously, because you're going to be charged more interest. They say this may cause conflict with other macroeconomic objectives, namely employment and economic growth. Okay, let's see. If the interest rates are rises, it becomes difficult to borrow money. Obviously, if it's difficult to borrow money, it's difficult for people to start businesses. And if they don't start businesses, then it affects employment. Obviously, people are not being employed, and also economic growth because remember economic growth, we said ukuthi it is we look at an increase in the production capacity, right, of a country. So if more businesses are not being established or created, then it affects production, which affects economic growth. Yeah. Then we also have stagflation. Inflation and unemployment increase at the same time. Stagflation, obviously, it's when inflation and unemployment increases at the same time. You saw there when we were looking at the I think it was a cost push inflation where we saw Guti, the prices were increasing and then the production and income were decreasing, right? We also have social and political effects. Inflation results in an unhappy society. Obviously, we're not happy with inflation. The prices keep increasing. It results in an unhappy society and social and political unrest. People start striking and yeah, inflation causes climate and conflict and tension. Yeah. We also have remedial policies for curbing inflation. So how can we curb inflation? So the demand pull inflation, remember we said demand pull inflation is the inflation which is caused by an increase in the aggregate demand, right? People have more money, so now they demand more goods and services. So we can use the contractionary monetary policy. So when you're using the contractionary monetary policy, we use two instruments, which is the interest rate and one instrument, which is the interest rate. And the interest rate can be used to reduce money supply or increase money supply. So if we have inflation, demand pull inflation, remember I said that is where people have more money on in their hands, right? More disposable income, which now they then and there is an increase in money supply in circulation, right? I even made an example to say that maybe credit is cheaper, even it's cheaper to even borrow money. That is why the demand for goods and services is increasing, right? For demand pull inflation. So to try now and to curb this inflation, we can use the contractionary monetary policy, which uses the interest rate. So how can we use to get this interest rate? We can increase the interest rate to try and reduce the money supply, right? So by increasing interest rates, borrowings becomes expensive and I'm just gonna stick to borrowing. Borrowings becomes expensive, so people cannot borrow money, they cannot take out loans, and then which will then reduce the money supply, which will then reduce the money. Sorry, which will then reduce the money which is in the circulation, which people hold, right? So now if they have less money that they hold, then their demand starts to do what? To decrease, right? Also, they can use the contractionary fiscal policy, which okay, sorry, this can lead to this can push the economy to a recession, right? Remember, recession is this one here from our business Dalan, from our business cycle. Have something like this, a trend line, then we have this. So this phase here is a recession where we have economic activities are declining or decreasing, right? So if there's an increase in the interest rate, it becomes expensive to borrow money, right? So it becomes expensive for um to borrow money to start like businesses, for instance, and and yeah, and what? It decreases the money in circulation, so even consumption expenditure decreases. Um consumption expenditure decreases, now jobs are created, obviously. And yeah, man, it pushes the the economy into a recession, an increase in the interest rate, right? And then contractionary fiscal policy might push the economy into a recession also. With the contractionary fiscal policy, they can use like the government spending or taxation. So let's say now we have demand pull inflation where there's an um an increase in money supply and there's want to reduce the money in circulation, obviously because people have more money, which is why the aggregate demand is increasing. So the contractionary fiscal policy, they can reduce government expenditure or they can increase taxation, right? Or they can increase. That is why I'm saying I miss the slides that had notes because I had all these notes. But like taxation also, they can do what? They can increase taxation. Because now people have more money, right? They have, oh, forgot an E here. Okay. People have more money, right? They're demanding more goods and services. So to try and discourage that, the government will reduce the government expenditure and then also do what? Increase taxation, right? And then I hope you guys got this one. So for demand pull inflation, you can use two remedies or policies to curb inflation, which is contractionary monetary policy, which uses the interest rate. So to try and curb demand pull inflation, we can increase the interest rates, making borrowings to be expensive and reduce money supply. And we can also use the contractionary fiscal policy where we reduce government expenditure and increase taxation. We also have cost push inflation. To curb cost push inflation, we can use government can restrict wage rise, but this could create conflict. So with the government to do, sorry, to restrict wage rise, it's basically where the government will be like, okay, let's not increase the wages of the workers, right? Inflation is increasing, but now we're not increasing, sorry, the cost push inflation the wages of the workers is what is not increased. So this one can create conflict because if prices are increasing, workers also want their wages to increase, right? To be adjusted, Pela, so that they can afford their their basic needs, right? So if the government restricts wage rise, it could create conflict. Remember, with the cost push inflation, we said that it is where there's an increase in the cost of production. And we said, Duguti, one of the causes is an increase in the wages and we said it's increasing the wages and salaries, right? Which increases the cost of production. So if now we do not increase the wages and the salaries, it will then help with curbing what cost push inflation, right? But this could also create what conflict. We also have reducing corporation tax. So corporation tax is tax basically which is paid by the business. So if that tax is reduced, it's going to help the business to now take that amount that they're going to pay towards taxation and then use that amount in what? In their production process, right? Number three, it's government can give subsidies. So government can subsidize these businesses so that they can increase their production. But this could promote inefficiencies where now they are not being efficient enough because they know available to they are getting subsidies from the government, right? So subsidizing them, it helps with reducing their cost and curbing cost push inflation. Okay, we are done. Um, yes, guys, we're done for this chapter. Thank you guys for watching the video and wish you guys all the best on your studies.